G'day and welcome to the Genre Fiction Podcast. I'm Jack Roney.
And I'm Harry Colfer.
And Harry, joining us for this episode is author Alicia Thompson. X is Alicia's second book with US publisher Nine Star Press and her first foray into crime. Alicia has a master's in creative writing and her debut novel, Something Else, was published in 2021. She lives in Sydney in the Hunter Valley and delivers creative writing workshops. So, Alicia, welcome to the Genre Fiction Podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So there's a number of things we want to get through, but first of all, let's just quickly talk about your books. So your two novels, Something Else, and X. Just tell us a little bit about each of the two books. Are they two separate standalone novels? What inspired the idea? And just tell us a little bit about the sort of the publication journey that you went through for each of those two books.
They are standalone books, Jack. Something Else is slightly autobiographical, had some things that I wanted to explore. They say write what you know, and they also say write what you want to understand more. And I made it a male protagonist because I didn't want to be identified with the main character and I didn't want people thinking it was about me. But the interesting thing was once I made it this male character and invested myself in his person.
Okay, I've lost you both, and I don't know whether I'm about to get kicked out. No, if you,
Oh, we're on to about 80 odd.
sorry,
How much did you get?
only the first couple of seconds.
Shall I start again?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much. I think I got the question out. You started talking. You're talking about writing what you know, and then. But can you start the answer again? Ready? Go.
Okay. My books are standalone, Jack. My first one is a little bit semi-autobiographical. I substituted a male character instead of having it female because I didn't want it to be identified with myself. And that turned out to be a really good thing to do because David just became his own self and it became so much less me, just a few details in common, really. And he just ran with the story, character drives plot. And I had it manuscript assessed by Nicola O'Shea, who's very well regarded in the industry. And she gave me some wonderful feedback. And I put it in a drawer because I got a job. And then when COVID came along, as so many of us did, I let my job go. And I thought it's now or never. I'm getting to an age where if I want to pursue writing, I've really got to give it a red hot go. And I did the fixes and sent it around and heard crickets because it was COVID. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I had a strong LGBT theme going on. And I thought, right, who wants this genre particularly? Who am I going to market it to that really wants this? And I Googled and I found about 5 in the United States and I sent to all of them and Nine Star Press responded like almost immediately, which was very encouraging. So I went with them and I didn't intend it to be the case, but my second one's also got a bit of an LGBT theme, enough for them to be interested. So they published my second book, which is a crime ghost story. So I'm very happy with that progress so far.
So you said the second one called X is a crime ghost story. Can you just
Yes.
elaborate, explain that a little bit more?
Well, it's crime and it's got a little bit of a ghostly element in it. You could sort of think Jacqueline Bublitz's Before You Knew My Name, which is also a crime novel with a paranormal element. And there's other books in the market that are slightly like that. It's not an overtly ghost story, but it's a slight bit of speculative. It asks the reader to extend their belief a little bit.
And it's
Not a police procedural then.
Oh, no, there is a police procedural in X.
Okay.
The point of view is the woman that's having these experiences. But I realised when I was telling the story, for the crime to be fully fleshed out and discovered properly, I needed another point of view. So I introduced a a senior detective sergeant, Zandra Bentley. She meets this woman in her grief counselling sessions. So I alternate between the two points of view, which actually works quite well because I've got an emotional, grief-stricken woman who's going through great turmoil in her life. And then I alternate with this very pragmatic, practical person who's a solution seeker. So I alternate between the two, and I get those 2 points of view, and they mesh together quite well. So in that way, we get to the solution.
Cool.
So when you were doing the rounds initially and pitching, and you said, I think we've all experienced that, sending out to agents and publishers, and you just hear nothing back. You then thought, well, look, your book has got LGBTIQ kind of themes. Let's focus on, is there a publisher out there that's looking for a particular style of book? So what kind of advice would you have for other people that might be, say, in your same boat, regardless of the theme or the genre of the book, in terms of how they might go about finding a publisher that is kind of looking for what you've got to offer? Those niche driven publishers.
Yeah, look, it can be difficult. I suppose the States has more variety in the that they're more able to focus on niche markets, whereas in Australia, we're such a small market. I don't think an Australian publisher could afford to do that so much. So I think it does force you overseas to an extent. However, I don't know whether either of you have done it, but if you do speed dating with the Australian Society of Editors or other places, the publishers who front up to those events, or the agents, will come forward and say, look, we're specifically looking for YA, we're specifically looking for crime, commercial, fantasy, women's fiction, whatever it is they're looking for. So that will give you a guide as to who might be looking for it more generally, I suppose. But otherwise, you've just got to look at the websites and just take the temperature that's out there and do your homework, really. That's all I can really suggest. I mean, I've only got 2 books published so far, so I'm hardly an expert, but that's what I would do.
Yeah, I had a go at the ASA, the Australian Society of Authors, the pitching, the speed dating. It was a really good experience. What about you, Harry? Have you done that previously?
No. I did turn up to a local sort of speed date sort of thing, but what I found is that there weren't, and it was for agents, and there weren't many agents. And basically, when I sort of trimmed down from not sort of romance and not YA or kids books or sort of picture books and stuff like that, I probably had one person that I could go and speed date with, which was a bit limited. And then it turned out their main focus was romance. So it was not exactly the most successful day I've spent.
Actually, that highlights something else too. I went to Sydney Bad Crime Festival, which obviously is focused on crime. So they want what you've done if you've done a crime novel. And the beauty of that is you're actually sitting across the table from the agent and the publisher. And as opposed to the Australian Society of Authors, which gives you 3 minutes and you're racing against the clock, talking like a robot, you actually get 6, 8 minutes, and it's conversational, and you can really connect with somebody, and it's really fantastic. And you know that they're interested in your genre. And I believe, I haven't done it myself, but if you've written romance, the romance writers conferences do exactly that too. So that's another way you can really focus on your particular genre and know that you're hitting your target.
Sure.
Yeah, I can certainly recommend the Australian Society of Authors speed dating. I went through the process earlier this year. I think they have two slots per year, one in around March, April, and then one around October. So I did the one early this year.
I think there's more than that, Jack. I think there's about 3 or 4, depending.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they separate them by a few months and they pre-advertise them, and you can put an application in and try and secure I think you got to pay per time slot, but the one I did, I had 2 time slots with 2 different publishers, and these were large mainstream publishers here in Australia. And I looked at what their offerings were and what they were interested in. So mine was a crime, sort of a crime mystery. So I found those publishers that were interested in that sort of thing. Had my pitching. One of them said, look, sorry, I don't need to see any more of your material. Thank you anyway. One of them did, I think it was Penn Macmillan, actually said, yeah, we were interested in seeing your material. I sent the material through, but sadly, I didn't make it through to the next hurdle. But at least, it was a way to speak with a publisher for them to get the eyes on my material rather than it being lost in the slush pile. But the whole process of planning for your 3-minute pitch is such a great process to go through in terms of finessing your elevator pitch and your synopsis. And you've literally got 3 minutes. They basically, you log on, we did it via Zoom, and they say, thanks for joining us. Let's get underway. Boom. And you just got to roll. So you have to be prepared. But ASA have actually prepared a little video where, and I watched it, and they said, this is how you should break up 3 minutes. Spend the first minute doing this, second 30 seconds doing this. And there's a formula to it, and follow that strictly. And I was quite happy with the pitch that I did, and I got it in under 3 minutes, enough for me to ask the question, do you have any questions? And then it was either yes or no, one or two really quick questions, and that was, thank you very much, your time is now expired, and that was it. It was 3 minutes and it went so quick, and I spent weeks preparing for it, but it was a really positive experience. I'd certainly recommend it for anyone who is interested in having a go and at least getting your work in front of publishers. Again, the Australian Society of Authors, they advertise it on their website.
Cool. I mean, you do. I mean, it's a lot of work, and sometimes you have to ask if you're only going to be put in front of boutique publishers. Then sometimes you might have to say, well, do I do that, or do I spend the time doing self-publishing? But I think we'll get to that later.
Yeah, I mean, the real estate of your pitch, allocating that 3 minutes is critical. But as Jack said, it really tests your knowledge of your book. If you can't put that pitch together, you should be going back to the drawing board and seeing how well you understand your book and who your market is. And I think it's a very good test to go through.
So I'm progressing here. I'm just going to flag it now. We talked about this before. We've already had one internet outage. There's a pretty massive storm flying over Brisbane at the moment. And I'm trying to mute my mic. If you hear a god-awful boom, we've got thunder and lightning cracking.
And if Jack flies out of his chair.
Yes, yeah. So
when you disappeared earlier, I was saying
we get to see the feet fly up.
There's a big lightning boom and he's gone.
Yeah, actually we did. I digress from it. This time last year, because what is it, mid-November? It's not even summer yet, and we've been getting low to mid-30s every day. Summer storms every afternoon. We actually got hit by lightning last year, and we lost a brand new air conditioning unit that had been installed the previous day, a brand new fridge, computer. Luckily, insurance covered the replacement. But yeah, so here we are under duress, trying to, we'll come.
Jack,
record
what
these.
God have you offended?
I don't know. But we seem to have a problem with recording podcasts with storms. But anyway, let's push on. So the next thing I want to talk to you about, or get your thoughts on, Alicia, is pre and post COVID, and how has COVID changed things in terms of what's changed for authors in terms of book promotions and book launches since COVID, now that we're sort of, we're post COVID and we're coming off the back of COVID. So how are things different now compared to, the stuff we experienced and the limitations that we experienced during COVID? And then secondly, perhaps you can kind of answer both. Secondly, what things or what kind of legacies have been left over from COVID that have stuck with us as a result of the changes we've had to make?
Look, I think COVID actually accelerated changes that would have come about anyway. Look, Jack, you launched your debut during COVID as well. That was one thing that sort of brought us together. So you'd have this experience as well, particularly as your publisher's probably not dissimilar to mine. As I said, I heard a pin drop out there, and when I tried to get my promotion hat on, because my publisher's overseas and doesn't do a lot of distribution or promotion, it's all up to me. And my book is print on demand, which means, for those that don't understand that process, it means when you're print on demand, you ask bookshops to have your book on consignment. Now, what that means with normal publishers, what they don't sell, they can just return to the publisher and get their money back. Now, with print on demand, that's not possible. So you're effectively underwriting it. Now, for them to trust you to do that, you have to have a relationship with them. So it means burning your shoe leather, going to all the bookshops and getting in touch with them and asking if they will put your book on the shelf. So that's one aspect. But in terms of people saying yes to events, of course, as you would know, nobody was going to libraries. Everything was shut. And when you look at the major patrons for libraries, they tend to be your over 55s. And they were the most frightened of catching COVID of the whole lot. So there were no events. And even if they did run an event, not many people came. And one thing I've seen post-COVID, and I think I really hope this is changing, I got the sense that after 2 years, 3 years even, some of those patrons had got out of the habit of going to events, so they just stopped. They stayed at home, even when it was the all clear had been announced. And that's really sad. But I do sense there's a lot of new festivals coming up now. I've seen a lot that are having their first year of activity. So that's really positive. It shows that there's an appetite out there and people still want to get out there and meet people, hear about writing, buy books, from the source. I think that's all wonderful. And with my second book, it's been so amazing. I'm just getting all these yeses, which I didn't get before. So I'm doing all the same cold calling. I mean, before I probably had a 5% success rate, which sounds not too bad, but it's pretty miserable, really. But it was enough to get some activity. But this time I've probably got double or triple the results, and I've had a very busy period after the launch. I've had about 12 or 15 events in November, and I've got plenty lined up. But the other thing I'm noticing too is that the libraries are booking well in advance. Like, I got in touch with Newcastle Writers Festival, I think at the end of July, and they said, oh, we've just booked our people for next year. And they're in July.
Yeah.
So a year in advance, and I missed out. So you've really got to keep your records and know when the festivals are on, and have a good idea of when they're actually looking. Because if you miss the boat, that's it. And some of these festivals are biennial too. So if you don't get it, it's 2 years.
Yeah.
So what I do is I keep a spreadsheet, because I'm a bit of a spreadsheet nerd, and I keep all the records of the festivals when they're appearing. I've got all the libraries, contacts for the libraries, everything, because you have to build that network, and I don't keep it in my head. So you have to have it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say the other thing I've noticed post-COVID, and I'm sure you'd notice it too, and here we are, many more podcasts. People are listening to audiobooks so much more now than they were before. I think this would have happened anyway, but I think COVID has helped accelerate it, and people want to get their material via their ear when they're walking, driving, vacuuming, doing whatever, and that's fabulous too.
Yeah, sure. There is a consideration though that although there's not a massive number of festivals up here in Brisbane or in Queensland in a whole, there wasn't as many lockdowns. There wasn't anywhere near as much sort of restrictions placed on Queensland. So there is sort of like a lot of differences between, New South Wales where you are and Queensland where we are. We still had things we could go to. There was far less restrictions as a result of COVID compared to New South Wales, compared to other states. And I think Queensland and Western Australia were very similar in that the borders were just locked down.
Actually, what I observed, Harry, was that regional and rural areas were a lot more open to it. It was the city libraries and events that were shut down. The rural events were a lot more flexible about it, because COVID hadn't been as virulent, or it hadn't got out there as much. So that was another reason to approach the more remote places. Plus, they were very grateful when somebody did approach them, because, when you go to somewhere like Wagga or Orange, not everyone's going out there, so they bring the plate of scones out. It's fantastic.
And I have to say, I've had some positive library experiences. Even just recently, I've had some disastrous library sessions where I've had 5 people turn up.
5? You got 5? You're
But more recently, there's definitely been a resurgence in people coming along to author talks at libraries. I don't know if you heard that big crack of thunder in the background, and my whole roof is shaking at the moment. I'll keep pushing on. Hopefully the mic's not picking up the thunder. So recently myself and 2 other authors, Troy Henderson and Kate Steele, we're all from Hawkeye Publishing, and we all sort of write different styles of crime fiction. And we had a series. It was 3 different library events separated by about a month in the one region, but different libraries. And they were on a Saturday afternoon, and we would come as a panel, and we kind of had our routine down pat. We'd done it a few times and kind of just rolled and bounced off each other. It was quite organic, talking about crime fiction generally. And we were probably getting 40, 50 people to each of these sessions, and also selling a few books at the end, because my experience has been going to libraries, that the people that come to library talks don't want to buy
Don't
books
buy the
because
books.
usually they're probably retirees and they want to just borrow books off the shelf. They don't want to spend money on books. But that's been a positive uptake I've noticed in doing library events as well. That number one, people are coming, and number two, people are still prepared and expect that the authors will be doing a book sale at the end. So I've definitely seen some positives in recent times as well, off the back of some of the negatives that we experienced during COVID.
I think that's actually a fabulous idea you kind of segued into, was if you are writing books and you have any colleagues who are writing books that are similar, get together, because that extra bang for buck, when you're Neville Nobody approaching a library, unless they've heard of you or they know of you or they've seen you before, they're less likely to take you on. But if you turn up and there's 3 Neville Nobodies, that actually is offering them something interesting, because there's interaction, there's conversation, there's 3 books. If someone comes along and they don't like one, they'll buy one of the books possibly. And I think that's fantastic. If you can get a friend together to do that, it's so much more bang for buck. I think that's a really ingenious thing to do if you can do it.
Cool.
So, Alicia, let's now move into the workshops, and it does kind of tie in with your experiences working with libraries and doing author talks, presentations, workshops. But first of all, let's just take a look at the workshops that you deliver. So you've got a master's in creative writing and you're a published author. So you're going out and, credit to you, you're delivering, you're being proactive, and you've constructed your own workshops that you're delivering. So tell us about the workshops and what are the broad topics that you cover.
Well, I've also done a Cert 4 in workshop training and facilitation, which I think was very helpful because it helps you understand education processes, how people learn. It also helps you understand how to pace your material and what the learning outcomes need to be. Like, you can't just talk at a group. You actually need to give them something to take away. So I've developed, I developed 2 courses actually, Finding the Plot and Kickstart Your Novel. And when I'm marketing to a library, I always say, look, depending on your patrons, I'm very prepared to customise material if you give me an advance warning of what it is you want. And Orange Library actually did that. They said, we want something that's really exercise heavy. We just want to have lots of active activities. And I was like, okay, I can do that. That's fine. So I developed Exercise Your Writing Muscles. Now, there's a lot of overlap between the 3 courses that I do. Kickstart Your Novel is by far the most popular, because I think everyone sees the process of writing a novel as quite an opaque, mysterious thing. And it's why at writers' festivals, those questions come up of, well, what's your process? When do you get up in the morning? What do you touch, and what are your routines, as if there's some magic to it, which I suppose in some ways there is. So to
sit in front of the computer and write.
I think it's called bum glue, Harry.
Yeah.
That's the thing they don't want to hear.
Yeah. Time,
exactly. So I take them through the different elements of a novel and Kickstart Your Novel, and we do some great exercises, which I have to credit Catherine Hayman for. I did some wonderful classes at continuing education at Sydney Uni. And Catherine Hayman, not as well known as I think she deserves in Australia. She's more known in England, but she did these wonderful exercises that literally sent me home to write chapter 1. I couldn't believe it. And she in turn credited Mark Haddon, who wrote Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. She stole them from him. So these are very beautifully pedigreed exercises, and I'm very pleased to acknowledge that I got them from somewhere very worthwhile. But everyone loves them. They are very, very good, and you can do them over and over again. And Finding the Plot has a little bit of that, but it's more focused on structure. And I have these spreadsheet templates that help people understand, like when you're writing 100,000 words, you've got to keep that all in your head as a writer. You've got to keep in touch with what your characters are doing and where your subplots are and where's your midpoint, where's your climax, your mini climax, all of that sort of stuff. And it's sort of giving them a bit of a toolkit to help them monitor that. And I say to the libraries, listen, if you haven't got people who are actually actively writing, and not everybody is, they come along because they like to write. And I say people who actually are big readers, this workshop will help them understand the books they're reading, because I'm talking about structure and how books work. And I do get that feedback that a lot of people go, oh my goodness, my TBR's expanded, and now I want to reread a book that I read because you've told me so much about this book that I should have got out of it. So that's helpful. And the exercise one is what it is. For example, I did that for ACT libraries, and they asked me to do it twice in a row, once for teens and once for adults. And I presented the same class, but they were very different classes, I can tell you. That the teens, they were all clammed up, didn't want to speak. Eventually, I started to tease it out of them. Once someone spoke, you couldn't shut them up. And what was really impressive is every single one in the class was writing a novel. Every one of them. They
Excellent.
all had ideas, and one of them handed me a sheet of paper and said, can you have a look at this for me and give me some feedback? I just thought, wow, the adults aren't that forward, you know. It was fantastic. So every class is different, but from my perspective, I get paid to be in a room of my tribe talking about my passion, and I just absolutely love it. And so I suppose when you're passionate about something, it communicates to the people that you're with, and they love it too. And I get such great feedback. It's very draining, but I just love it.
And you talked about how you sort of came up with the three different course ideas or workshop ideas. I guess you were catering for a need. Would that be the main reason why you came up with these three specific kind of workshops?
I think you've got to make the courses relatively broadly appealing. I know there's authors out there that, like Pamela Cook, for example, she's got Turning Up the Tension. Holly Craig does a series, and some of them are a lot more focused. And I think, this is me speaking, I think if you were doing those at a library, those courses are probably online and for people that have actually got novels going that have specific problems and they want to know how to fix specific problems, or they're in the middle of something and they need some inspiration. Mine are at the library, and they're for people that are contemplating writing, are thinking about it, want some encouragement, want a few tools to get them going. So unfortunately, or fortunately, that means I have to do more widely appealing courses. But so many I've done now, the libraries have said, oh, we'd love to have you back. And it's the same people. And I'm thinking, gosh, well, if I came back and it was the same people, I'd need to offer something a little bit different. So I'm considering doing a course on building characters or characterization, something like that, that's a little bit more the next level.
It's interesting that you talk about the different workshops are tailored for different audiences, but it's this, I'll just give an example very shortly, but how audience needs can change. For example, there was a period where I published 4 books, and I've just finished writing my 5th, and I was getting some really good traction and momentum with my story ideas and writing. Suddenly, I've hit a brick wall the last couple of months. I'm really struggling with, and whether you've got any ideas, I'm kind of throwing this at you unprepared and putting you on the spot here, but taking one step back, you talked about some of your courses are for, or workshops are for people thinking about writing and are trying to express their thoughts and ideas, and how can I turn an idea into a full-length novel versus, say, a short story. But at the moment, I just feel a bit kind of lost. I've been floundering for the last couple of months. I've finished this manuscript that I've been editing and pretty much has consumed almost the last 2 years, this new thing that I've written. And I'm now at a crossroads. I need to make a decision. Am I going to write a book 2 of the one that I've just finished? It hasn't been published, and there's never going to be a guarantee it will be published. So I don't know whether I should invest my time in writing a book 2 of a book that hasn't yet been published, or whether I should try something different and try my hand again with a different style book, again, pitching to agents and publishers. But the problem is I've got a few ideas, but I just cannot settle on anything. Previously, my mind latched onto an idea and I just had to write the story, and I had that momentum. I'm really, really struggling with that at the moment in terms of settling on an idea that's going to propel me, because I know what's required to write a 90,000 word manuscript. And I'm actively looking what's happening in the news, what's happening in the world. Every time I read a book or watch a movie, I'm trying to be inspired, but I'm just really struggling. And I guess there's probably a lot of people that, whether you're a first-time author or you're an experienced author, you're still going to, at some point in your career, have this problem that I'm currently experiencing. So help, please.
Okay, lie back on the couch, Jack. Let's have a conversation. Look, I've got more ideas than I've got life left to write them, I'm afraid. So, but I've got a similar issue to yourself, Jack, where I've been spruiking a crime novel, and I've had a lot more considered interest in it than I've had of anything before, but no takers yet. And I've already got a follow-up in mind. And like you, I'm thinking, well, there's no point wasting energy on this follow-up if no one wants the first book. So I'm looking through all my notes and historical sketches and short stories, and I'm thinking, what have I got? What have I got? What have I got? Which is actually how X got written. I had a page of description, and I kept going past it thinking, I need to do something with this. I need to do something with this. And eventually I thought, Charlie deserves some resolution here. I want to know what happened to him. I want to know what happened to him. I have to write the story to find out. So that's where I'm at. And I've got a speculative romance that I'm thinking of writing. And I'm thinking, listen, if I'm not getting any traction with the crime, and I'm not really clear whether crime's reaching a point of saturation or not, and I'm thinking maybe it might be time to freshen myself up with a different genre, expand my mind in a different direction, because you get locked into a certain way of thinking, I think, when you write certain books for a while. I'm just going to move on to the next thing, because I think you can't dwell on what hasn't worked. And my positive way of looking at it is, when I get that big deal and they're saying, we want to sign a gazillion book contract with you, I can say, well, I've got this wardrobe, just let me open the door and 5 are going to fall out, and nothing's ever wasted, right? I've got my first book. It's my apprenticeship novel, I call it. I'm never going to publish it, I'm sure. But it taught me everything I've got happening today, plus the novels I've got. So, but in terms of getting inspiration, Jack, one of the things I would advise you, and I advise people in my groups, is that character drives plot. And you've really got to develop deep, motivated characters who want something. Kurt Vonnegut said, your character has to want something. Otherwise, we're not going to turn the page. Happy families with nothing to get, boring. We want struggle. We want conflict. We want dissatisfaction. We want aspiration. We want a choice to be made. We want crisis. And if you understand your character and how they're going to react, Eleanor Roosevelt said, women are like tea bags. You've got to put them in hot water to understand how strong they are. Well, when you've got your character and you know what makes them tick, start pouring hot water on them and see how they react. Do they get stronger? Are they weak? Do they fold? What happens? And you really need to understand that character in depth, like really focus on your character. Like Hemingway said, write the iceberg. You've got the little tip above the water. You've got the great big bit underwater. And he said, you only tell the reader what's above the water, but by God, you'd better know what's under the water. Mm-hmm. So I have little exercises in my group where I test people that actually have some characters, and I ask them crazy questions. Like there's a Proust questionnaire online. Crazy questions, and they might never come up in your novel, but it's about testing your understanding of your character's emotions and where they're at. And once you've got a character and you understand them and you've decided what it is they want, well, how are they going to get it? And who's the antagonist or the problem standing in the way, stopping them getting it? There's your story starting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you want some sort of, I don't know whether I'd actually coin it as advice or whatever, but at the end of the day, if you think your characters, your story has a sequel, write it. Stop worrying about agents and publishers and stuff like that. I mean, at the end of the day, I've got a few awards and I've got now going to have 4 novels and none of it's been done by a publisher. It depends on what you want from your writing. But if the burning sort of passion, if you think that story has a sequel, write it. Don't worry about whether, because from all of this podcast time and all of the advice we've had, it's luck. so much of it is luck.
Absolutely.
And so just because your first book has not been picked up, don't worry about it. You can move on to the sequel, start writing the sequel. Sometimes if it's a burning sequel, if you know that something's happening there, just get on and write it. I mean, my sequel to Dead Regular took me 5 months to get a first draft done, and it was that easy because I knew what was there. I knew it was going to happen. Now, it's up to you as to whether you self-publish or whether you just keep that in your cupboard waiting to publish. And then at some point a publisher might. I understand that a lot of the time publishers don't like taking on books that have been self-published, but you, Jack, that happened to you. You'd already self-published your first book, Demon Weight, and then your publisher took you on and then published those. So, I wouldn't worry about the whole sort of issue of, do I write this because I haven't actually managed to get that one out? It depends on whether that story's got more to tell, whether those characters have got more to tell. If they've got more to tell and there's more in the story, go for it. I mean, I've got to the point with mine where I've got to 4 books with this character. I don't want to go any further. That's it. It's like I need to move on. My character needs to move on because too much has happened to him. And you go, well, you got to draw the line somewhere and then move on and write something else. But it's
time for Jono to retire and buy a boat.
Absolutely, yes, definitely, and more true a word has ever been said, because it's all about boats in the fourth
and leave them wanting more, Harry.
Yeah, oh yes. I mean, the way I've done this in this last book that I've written about Jono, there was a police officer who's a partial character who becomes a bigger character within the books. I've given him a whole heap in this last book. I've given him a whole heap of backstory. So you're now getting a whole heap of stuff about him that you never knew, so that I've pitched him up as my detective, who is really easy to write books about because, that's what they do. They investigate crimes. And so it's far easier to write a series about a detective than it is to write a series about a paramedic who shit keeps happening to him. It's too much can happen to one person, and so you can move on. So I've already pitched it up that I can bring somebody else in.
I think I'm guilty of overthinking it. Whereas previously, when I was kind of newer in my writing, I was just writing because because
you wanted to.
Because I wanted to. I had the story, and I wasn't thinking about the publishing industry and publishers. I just had the story inside me that I had to write, and that's happened for my 3-book crime series and my standalone. I just had these stories in me, and I couldn't keep up with my fingers. I needed to type these stories, so I never had a problem with writer's block. This is the first time I'm really struggling with, okay, what am I going to write next? Whereas previously the books have just written themselves. I think it's because I'm overthinking it. And going back to your advice, Alicia, I think, well, actually both of your advice, and what you're saying, Harry, is true. I know that in my heart, I know that I've got to write a book 2 of my new series, and
there you go.
That's where
there's your answer.
Because I kind of feel like with this new manuscript, it's set itself up for a book 2, and so I'm going to break away from. I'm going to put to bed my first 3-book series. But going back to your advice, Alicia, around let the characters tell the story. So rather than focusing on what's my story going to be about, what's the plot, I need to focus on who are my characters, and they are the story. So I'll take that advice on board and start thinking a little bit more about who are the characters and what journeys do I want to send them on, and therein lies the story.
Yep.
Because aspects of their background could bring about the story. I mean, look, everyone writes differently. Like, you've got plotters and you've got pantsers, and I would have thought that crime would specifically be a plotting person's playground. But Margaret Hickey, I heard her speaking once, and she freaked me out. She said, oh no, she said, I'm a pantser. I just write into the blue, and halfway through the novel I figure out who did it, and then I back patch. And I'm just nearly crossing my legs, wetting myself, thinking, how could you do that? Like, because I will write my first draft knowing where it's going. However, I'm prepared to change it along the way, but I like to know how it's going to end. I need to have some kind of anchor, and to write it not even knowing who did it, I just thought, wow, I was quite in awe of her doing that. I suppose now you two will tell me the same thing. But
Well, I dead regular. I actually changed who was the murderer by the serial killer. I changed who it was as the
oh
character.
wow, okay.
And it was about, I'd got to in the first draft, I got to about the second to last chapter, and I decided, nah, it can't be that person. It has to be this other person. And so what it does mean, and I've said this before in a podcast, is probably more than once, is that Stephen King says that if you as a writer know who the bad guy is or who the murderer is, your reader will. And so if you write a book not knowing who is actually the bad person or who's going to turn out to be the murderer, then it makes it really difficult for the reader to work out who it is.
That's interesting. Makes it difficult to write, doesn't it?
Not necessarily. If you put enough red herrings in and enough potential people, then you can choose which one you want to use at the end, which one fits better. And that's what I did. Is I went, actually, no, that one actually fits so much better than the one I had projected. So
gosh, I'm in awe of that, Harry. That's because that requires a different style of writing, obviously, to lay that network of clues, and then to have that bag of lollies to pick from and say, well, are we going to follow this trail or that trail? I suppose Agatha Christie does a similar sort of thing, because by the end of it, you think, well, it could be any of them. Just tell me the story.
Yes, yeah.
You know,
and that's what makes it so much more difficult to work out who it is, because you put enough of a smoke screen up, you can then choose who you want.
And what do you guys think of this growing trend? And I think it's a growing trend from what I've seen, this pressure to have these twisty novels where you've got to have a twist at the end. And I just think, someone like Christian White, everyone's saying, oh, he's the king of the twist and this one's the most amazing yet. And I just think the pressure to have these twists, there wasn't this pressure before.
I don't know. I mean, I'm more of a pantser, but I recognize I do have to actually put a lot of planning in. Generally, as I've said before, for this last novel, I had about five. I had a rough idea of what was happening with 5 chapters ahead, and that would be it. And there would be a general idea what was going to happen, but and I had a sort of an idea of where it was going to end, but that was it. And you sort of just work your way through that and pantser it. So it's a different process, but it's certainly much more. Not knowing where things are going to go is much more exciting way of writing.
Well, look, if we all wrote the same way, it wouldn't be interesting, would it?
True.
I think for me, my experience has been varied. I'm predominantly a planner, but what I'll do is I'll build my basic skeleton, my framework, and then when I'm writing each chapter, I'll then pants and add more meat to the bones as I go. Yeah. I just think it depends on the style of book that you're writing. My 3-book crime series was less a whodunit, but more of a cat and mouse. So initially it starts as a bit of a who's the mystery, who's the killer, and then we find out who the killer is, but then it's a case of trying to catch him, and then it's these standoffs and cat and mouse and a climactic kind of exchange at the end. So I think there you can pants more because you've got to be thinking less about setting up and having your structure, whereas the most recent manuscript I've written was told in 2 concurrent timelines, and I had to plan that ahead because it's alternating between the past and the present, and the 2 converge, and there's no way I could have pants that. I had to really plan both and kind of storyboard those 2 separate kind of storylines that then eventually converged. Going back to your point, Alicia, about the twists, again, probably my first 3 crime books didn't necessarily have twists as such. It was more about the cat and mouse, and they were probably more thrillers. Whereas the one I've just written does finish with a twist, and I had to pre-plan that because I had to set up the twist. And I think there's nothing, and I think those twists are good if they're executed well and they're well thought out and well planned. When your reader reads it, goes, "Oh yes," and then it's a positive experience for your reader, as opposed to the twist where, for example, it's a serial killer, and at the beginning
I've never been there.
Yeah, it's some innate character who is referenced in one sentence, like the cleaner who walks past a scene in chapter one, and then in chapter 40 we discover that the cleaner was the killer, and the cleaner has had nothing to do with the story. I think you can't have those twists where they're just a twist for the sake of a twist, and your readers will see right through that if it's a very
Yeah.
shallow twist.
Yeah.
That's really taking Chekhov's gun to an extreme, isn't it? Because I mean, that's what we get in Hollywood. You know, you've got this scene and you see the close up on the shovel in the corner, and you think, oh, the
Oh, the
shovel in
shovel's
the
gonna
corner,
go.
oh, and so we're all waiting for the shovel to come back. So I suppose when you're watching a movie, it's more obvious, and it's harder to be subtle about those things. I mean, you know, when you're writing the scene, you'd have to go, oh yes, you know, the garden tools are all in the corner, the fork and the shovel and the this and the that, you know, and just be a little bit more about it. But you know, those things do require, if you like Margaret Hickey going backwards, that would be a little bit more challenging, I suppose. But if you've got an idea of what your possible Cluedo things are going to be, then you can sort of pepper them around, and you know, they can all hide each other a little bit, I guess. As you say, it depends on the story. I mean, X is more of a how done it, and you do sort of get a sense of who might have been responsible midway point, but there's that challenge of, well, how did they do it, and how did they get away with it, and you know, what were the outcomes? There's a lot of emotional outfall in the book, and there's a lot of connections and disconnections going on. So there's more to it than just figuring out who did it.
Yeah, but the other thing is that, you know, for people listening, that if you are a pantser and you have you want to have a complicated plot, don't forget a lot of that can be done in the editing. So you can't, as we've banged on numerous times, you can't edit a blank page. So the more writing, more stuff you've got, you can then edit it and then write in the bits that make the complexities, that make the twists. Those get written in afterwards when you go, oh, actually, it'd be really good if that happened. And then you just twist what you got into a change in the flow of the book. You know, you don't have to start that out and have it all plotted to the nth degree at the start, because if you do that, you're not actually writing. You have a wonderful spreadsheet, but you got nothing written. And so by actually doing a bit of pantsing about throwing a few sort of ideas down and putting stuff out there, and then you've got something to work with. But it may be crap when you start. Well, it probably will be crap, but when you get to the end of the first draft. But that's what a first draft's for, you know. And then you start fixing it and twisting it and adding all those red herrings and complexities and stuff like that. It's a different way of doing it, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I did take Jack's point though, because when you've got a book that's got the converging timelines, or you've got parallel action,
absolutely,
I need a spreadsheet for that, because getting those dates lined up and making sure that you've got everything's hunky-dory. I mean, even as it was, I had something creep through with my book. I won't say what it was because I was horrified when I read it. I got a month wrong, which meant I had something so out, and I just thought, my proofers didn't pick it up, my editors didn't pick it up, I've read it 8 times and I didn't pick it up. So I'm kind of hoping the readers don't pick it up, but there'll be somebody's going to write to me.
Somebody will pick it up, because it's like I didn't pick up on Dead Regular. I had a paramedic pulling somebody out, or I had a character pulling somebody out of a car out of the back door, and that car model doesn't have a back door. You know, you will get informed by your readers that you know, you've screwed up. So
yeah. No, for sure. And I think I actually wrote to Jack. I was listening to one of your YouTubes, Jack, and you were talking about American terminology, and you said, you know, in Australia we don't have squad cars and we don't have squad teams. And I was listening to this going. And I went back and I was like, so I quickly edited it out, and I'm like, thank you, Jack Roney.